So, if enthusiasm seems to be waning among my students, I ask myself if one of these first three pillars is missing from my program. Is my curriculum failing to respect the natural language acquisition sequence and thereby imparting to my students a useless form of head knowledge regarding this language that should be a practical tool that they can use in the real world? Secondly, are my students failing to experience relationship with native speakers of this language that they're learning, and therefore they fail to see its applicability to their life? Thirdly, am I failing to infuse a sufficient amount of storytelling into the class to maintain interest? And then fourthly, this fourth pillar, if the first three are in place, almost invariably the fourth one will be as well. However, it is nonetheless the most important single tool that a teacher has to ensure that his or her students will eventually attain a certain degree of fluency. And that is simply oral participation. Now I say simply because it would seem natural that it's a given, that it's a regular part of every world language teacher's classroom experience. However, I'm talking about an intensive level and a 100% target language exposure to oral participation. I want students, when they enter my classroom, to be at least figuratively speaking on the edge of their seats as class discussions are taking place, because they recognize that I'm going to be holding them accountable for their engagement, their involvement in class discussion. I want there to be a healthy tension in the classroom that drives them to participate in class discussion. And I want them to see every class period as a testing situation, because I'm very objectively and accurately recording their participation in class discussion. And therefore they see themselves again as being accountable for what's going on at all moments of a class. Doesn't sound very relaxing for a student, does it? Well, I confess that I don't really want it to be. At the end of the last video, you may remember I talked about this lethargy when students can sit back and say, come on, teach me, I dare you. What I want as the teacher to get the weight off of my shoulders for carrying the class, and I want to get it onto the students' shoulders. I want them to carry the weight, and I do it for a very sound pedagogical reason. And that pedagogical reason is expressed in this very folksy proverb: you can't steer a car until it's moving. I want students to first regularly open their mouth and be willing to speak so that I can start to guide them toward more refined speech as time goes by, and concurrently so that they themselves can become much more at ease with actually speaking this language. Now, how do you do it? How do you motivate students to regularly involve themselves in class discussion? Well, I do it in two ways primarily. First of all, I try to take whatever we study, whatever the vocabulary topic or the grammatical structure we're studying, and bring it down to the level of the students' personal lives, into something that matters to the students in their own lives. For example, when we study the present progressive tense, we won't just study the grammatical concept, although I will model for them the form of the statement and lead them by means of images and sound, as you may have seen the ULET program, to forming the statements correctly, and then I'll reinforce to the point where the use of the present progressive is a linguistic reflex. Nonetheless, that's not where I end. That's only the beginning point for this grammatical study. My goal is to bring it down to the level of for example, what are your family members doing at this very moment? What are your closest friends doing at this very moment? And asking that question and first modeling, talking about my own family, invariably my students are going to be using this structure, the present progressive tense, as they respond to that question. And when we study vocabulary about daily routine, for example, I'll talk to the students about my own daily schedule, what I do, and I'll tend to illustrate my comments with images, pictures that I've taken at home of myself going through the activities of my daily routine. And we'll talk about, if I had the opportunity, what would I change in my daily routine with which I'm not particularly content? Or when we're studying object pronouns, I'll ask them, what is it that you really appreciate about your parents, or your siblings, or your best friends, And they'll invariably be obliged to use object pronouns in the course of their responses. They'll say things like, oh, they listen to me, or they buy me clothes, or they really understand me. Well, this personal focus keeps the students interested in sharing and also, very significantly, in listening to one another as conversation is going on. Like I said, typically I first share about myself to set an example, illustrate with photos when I can to maintain interest, and then I turn to the students and have them tell me. And of course, when they're telling me, they're also conscious that the more they speak, the more beneficial it'll be for their grade. Now, I'm conscious of their grade, but I'm thinking of it on another level. I'm thinking the more they speak, the more at ease they're becoming with speaking. And the more they're practicing these linguistic skills I want them to have, these linguistic reflexes that I've built into them, and the more they're going to be able to speak with fluency as time goes by. Now, the second means of motivating students, actually obliging students to engage in oral participation, revolves again around the word accountability. I have systems set up in my instruction whereby students, they're quite forceful, somewhat draconian, where students are obliged to participate if they intend to pass my class. I weight the oral component in the determination of a student's grade very, very heavily, and particularly in the first year of instruction. Here's a chart that shows you how I weight the different elements of a student's grade. So you can see that fully 50% of a student's grade in the first year is determined by their oral participation in my classes. That's a very heavy weight to give to one single element of a student's performance, but there's no element more important, especially in the first year, than that which describes a student's ease with using the language and which requires a student to speak the language on a regular basis if they're to succeed in my classes. One might think that oral participation is a subjective consideration and therefore wonder whether or not it should be weighted so heavily. But as you'll see in just a moment, as I present to you the oral participation evaluation spreadsheet, that the way in which I approach oral participation is anything but subjective. And then you can see in the second, third, and fourth years that a more balanced approach is taken between the different elements of a student's performance in class, although oral participation remains a significant factor. You've heard me say that I keep very accurate, very precise records regarding student performance in class as far as their oral participation is concerned. This is how I do it. First of all, I have this oral participation and record-keeping spreadsheet, which you see here before you. It's actually composed of two sides with identical information on both sides. Therefore, there's room for, as you see here, there is room for 3 classes on this side and 3 classes on the other. Where it says student 1, student 2, student 3, of course, you'd enter the names of the different students in your class. At the top of each class, you see a key there that indicates the kinds of symbols which are placed in these rectangles for each student. An A would be an absence, a T is a tardy, E indicates the student was excused during the class for whatever reason, and then a horizontal line indicates that this negative behavior, the student interrupted class in some fashion. And then, of course, there are hash marks that are placed in each one of these rectangles as the students participate orally in the course of class discussion. I actually don't manipulate this spreadsheet myself. I put it onto a clipboard after I photocopied it. Every day there's a new sheet, and I give the clipboard and the sheet to one of the students in the class, and they're the ones who actually record the information for me. This task of record keeping goes from student to student to student, so it's always a different student each day who's doing the record keeping. And I've never had any problem as far as any sense that records were not being kept accurately. So that's the first step. When the day is finished, I take this spreadsheet, or I should say I take this sheet on the clipboard, and I go to the spreadsheet I'm about to show you now and record or transfer all of this data. Okay, as I mentioned, I take that information off of the record-keeping sheet and I transfer it to this oral participation and evaluation spreadsheet. Now, this spreadsheet is was extremely complex to create because of all the formulae located behind many of the cells. However, as far as using it for you, the end user, is extremely simple to use. Now, because of the limitations of time in this video, I'm not going to go into the setup and the use of this spreadsheet. However, you can find within the teacher's manual, directly after the link where you can download the spreadsheet if you're interested, you can find a video that explains exactly how to set it up and how to use it on a daily basis. I'll just show you the kinds of information that it contains. First of all, I should point out that this is one class of up to 39 students. I hope you never have that many students. But there are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I believe. Yes, there's room for 6 different classes to be recorded on this spreadsheet. And you see that over here there's a comment indicator for each cell where you have information that you need to enter. This is where you insert class period. This cell indicates that you put the course name within this location. This is how many students are located in the class or are found in the class. And that's extremely important because the expectation as to a student's oral participation is going to be impacted by the number of students in the class, of course. Here we record the student's name. This is optional. You can indicate if the student was excused during the course of the class for any reason. Also optional is indicating whether or not the student interrupted class in any fashion. So a negative participation is indicated here. This is also optional. If the unauthorized use of English or of the native language of the student was used in class, you can indicate the quantity of times that occurred here. Thereafter, this is just an explanation of the data. This is nothing that you have to enter yourself. It's all automatically entered. This is where the grade will appear. The student's percentage up to 100% will appear. Over here you see where you actually enter on a daily basis the information regarding the student's oral participation. This is where you put the month of the year in numeric fashion, 9 for September, 10 for October. This is where you put the day, the actual date, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th of the month. And then down below is where you put the total amount of student contributions orally in the course of the class. Then to the far, let's see if I can scroll over here, to the far right, but the student's name, by the way, will appear automatically, as I'll show you in a second, in this cell right here. But to the far right is where you enter absences, and all you need to enter is the fact that the letter A indicating the student was absent on that particular day. And again, the date and the month will automatically appear after you've already entered them to the far right. So let me just show you what this would look like with a, let's just create a fictional class right here. This is first I think it's the period of the day, that's correct. So let's say it's first period, and this is going to be the class. This is, whoops, I'm going down one more here. There we go. Insert course name, I'll call it Spanish 1. And then this is where I enter the quantity of the number of students. Let's just choose a very small class, 5 students. Must be a private school. So here we are. I'll put some students' names in here. Bill, Mary, Susan, Phil, and Joe. So I'm going to indicate now that this is the, let's say it's the beginning of the school year. So this is 9 for September. If you want to save some time, you can fill across for future days as the month of September. Here I'm going to enter the first day. Let's say it's the 7th of September, not the 76th, the 7th. And that's the 8th. I can go ahead and fill certain ones out to save a little time. There's the first week of school, and this is the 2nd week of school, etc. Okay, now I've entered the days of the year. Now let's just say I've completed my first day of classes, and I have this sheet that I've just shown you a little while ago, the record-keeping sheet. And next to me, I simply go right down the column here under the 7th of September and indicate how many times each of these students participated in class discussion, and we'll just leave it right there. You notice how the grade automatically begins to appear. Now, poor Susan is already failing the class. Why is that? Well, she had no oral participation whatsoever. That's because she was absent that day. So what do I do if she was absent? I go straight across to the section that deals with absences. Here's Susan. You can see how the numbers have already transferred over, so we have all the dates already entered in this section. We go to Susan, and we just put in the letter, a capital A. And now let's go back and see what that has done for us. That indicates that under cumulative absences, she has missed 1/3 of a class discussion. I won't go into detail why it's I should say 3/10. I won't go into details of why it's 3/10 and not 1. That will be explained to you, the video explaining both setup and use of this spreadsheet. But you can see she has no grade up to this point. Well, this is how, therefore, I keep as accurate and precise records as I possibly can regarding student oral participation. I do it for 2 reasons. One, I want it to be very clear. I want there to be no doubt that my grade, which is very heavily weighted for oral participation, is absolutely objective. There's no subjectivity whatsoever involved. And then secondly, I want students to have no doubt either about the fact that it is absolutely indispensable to be involved on a regular basis, opening their mouths and speaking, contributing in class, if they are to succeed in my class. So intelligent curriculum which is developed in such a way that it respects the natural sequence by which people learn their language. Relationships with native speakers of the language which we're learning in class. The use of storytelling and the insistence upon active oral participation in class. Those are the 4 pillars on which any effective world language program needs to rest. If ever interest is waning in my classes, I ask myself, which of these 4 areas am I most likely neglecting on a daily basis? Well, this is the end of this 4-video series on effective world language instruction. And I just would like to return to what I said when we began in the very first video. I said that language learning is about opening doors to the possibility of relationships with people whom one could not otherwise know without the learning of this new language. It's incumbent upon us as world language teachers to throw out all presuppositions regarding how language should be taught if we recognize that the status quo is actually closing doors for our students to the possibility of relationships, of meaningful relationships carried out in this target language. You know, for those of us who are just interested in picking up a paycheck, I suppose why not just throw a first-year student another grammar packet and occupy them for a significant period of class time? But I highly doubt that describes very many of us in this profession. I think most of us deeply are concerned that our students would have the same kinds of rich experiences with this new language that we ourselves have enjoyed, either through our studies overseas or living overseas, or just knowing people who speak this language here within our own nation. So I'd encourage those of you who are sincere about wanting your students to share in these rich experiences that you and I have known, to open your mind to the possibility there might be another way to go about language teaching. René Descartes put it this way: if you would be a real seeker after truth, it is necessary that at least once in your life you doubt, as far as possible, all things. You know, I don't know about all things, but I do know that in my own teaching career, joy and satisfaction only came after I rejected the traditional means by which I had been taught language back in the 60s and 70s, and that with an open mind I consider, how is it that people truly learn language? You know, in the first video, you may remember that I told the story about my first baseman on my baseball team in France, who was the son of the prefect of the north of France, and how my family invited him to spend some time with us in the United States. And before we could take him to the States, I had to first go to the apartment in the prefecture and meet his father, so his father could kind of judge whether or not I was a trustworthy individual. You know, as I was making that video, I had one problem. I needed a photo of the prefecture to illustrate about what I was speaking, illustrate the fact this is a rather extravagant, glorious looking bit of architecture, and which also suggested the kind of a powerful individual I was going to speak with. The problem is I could find pictures online, but I didn't have the confidence that I would be able to use them necessarily legally. So as I was making that video, out of the blue, you might say, I received some photos from a very old and good friend in France named Philippe. We became close friends with Philippe during the 13 years that we lived in the north of France. And one of these photos that he sent me, he sent them just, as you'll see in a second, with the notion of friendship in mind, and to remind us of the city where we had become close friends with him. One of these photos was of the prefecture. More than ironically, Philippe was totally unaware of my need of that very photo to complete my work in that first video. Try and figure out the probability of that happening. In any case, on the back of the photo, he'd written these words. This photo, taken on July 14th, is, now the expression here is literally would have the sense of a nod to, but the idea is a tribute to Franco-American friendship. This photo, taken on July 14th, is a tribute to Franco-American friendship. It's in Lille. It's especially because of my thankfulness toward all of you in the Nesbitt family who live in my heart. That is what language learning is all about. It's about the relationships with people whom we can touch and who can touch our own lives and influence our lives as well. Are you taking risks in your pedagogy and thereby opening doors to such relationships for your students? Are you playing it safe and closing doors and also closing your students' minds to the possibilities of actually relating to other individuals with these languages. I invite you to investigate the ULET program. It's just one means. Undoubtedly there are others, but this is one means of transforming your own teaching experience and your students' lives. Thank you very much for those of you who've joined me and having thought this through. What a privilege it is to have this amazingly powerful role, the role of world language educator. We need to carry it out with a full assurance that what we are doing is not for our facility, but is for our students' well-being.